How's everybody doing? I'm out in the backyard today and I'm making some cages for my weed plants. So I figured I would just take you guys along and show you the process. So you don't need a whole lot of materials. You need some basic tools. You need some welded wire fence. I'll show you guys what I'm using in a second. And probably gonna want some work gloves. We'll get into that. Okay, so this is what we're talking about here. Okay, we're using welded wire fencing with the 2" by 4" squares. Okay, get this at all your hardware stores. You can sometimes find it at Walmart. You know, any country store will probably almost guaranteed have this stuff. Okay, comes in like 50-foot rolls. Okay, so here's the cage. It's about 19 inches across. Okay, depending on the strain of your plant, some plants get huge, like Northern Lights plants get massive. I'm growing green crack this year. Apparently that plant is going to be huge. So you may need an inner cage and an outer cage. So to show you the difference, here's your inner cage. One of those is an outer cage. There's a couple bundled up here, but you can see they've been flattened. Okay, so these things are like 5 feet across the center. So it depends on how big of a plant you're growing. Okay, so that's to start. Now, you have various ways of opening it up here. Let me just put this down and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So you can use a couple of different tools to cut through that welded wire fence. You can use pliers, right, with your cutters on them right here. These are good because you can get really close to that seam. You see how some of these still have, like right there in front of my thumb? You see that? Oh, let's get an angle on it there. Okay. So it depends on what you're using. That I ended up with that long piece because I was using metal cutters, and you can't get tight, right? You can't get right tight into the corner with these because of the thickness of the blade. But you can do better with the pliers, and you can do tighter with side cutters. Okay, you're gonna want a beefier pair of side cutters though, because I mean you're cutting through this. I mean, you know, you put enough force on it, it's going to cut out of the way. So to get this size of a cage right here, all I do is I unroll this roll right here and I count 30 spaces here, okay? And then I lay it flat out on the ground and then I just cut it up the length. So to attach them together, you've got various means you could do that too. You could cut them all down and leave every fourth one, see? And then you just wrap it around. So then I've cut this one off, I've cut that one off, and I've kept this one. Okay, this makes it really easy to take these cages apart in the fall, but you could just literally just step on them and flatten them out. Okay, another option is you can use zip ties, and you can just cut all these off nice and flat, and then just use your zip ties and then just zip tie it together. Because what's going to happen is this, right? When you cut that off, you're going to have all these sticking out. Right? So when you make your next cage, right, you're going to have all of these sticking out, which is where this piece comes from. Okay? So you've got a couple of different means to put this together. And it doesn't have to be as tight as Fort Knox, right? Because as your plant grows, it's going to grow out and it's going to keep tension on that seam, right? The next thing you need to figure out is depending on where you're growing your plant, if you're, let's say, growing it closer to a wall or an area where you can't get close to the back of it, now is where you're going to decide where you're going to put the holes in this, because you got to be able to get your arm in there, and you're going to be pruning, you're going to have to be picking out dead leaves. Closer to harvest, you may want to lollipop your plant, and pick out all the larvae and all the rest of that. And then at harvest season, you're definitely going to need to get your hands in here. So, I mean, you're growing a plant, it's going to require training. You got to get your hands in here. So you need to decide if you're going to put one, let's say, one on either side and one in the front, at what height you're going to do them at. So I generally like a decent size hole in the front, because I generally work on it from one direction, right? Like a lot of the work, like let's say I'm fertilizing, I want to get a watering can in there. So I like a decent size hole on the front. It doesn't have to be very high up, because you're going to be working with the soil, right? Like if you're using powdered fertilizer like a Gaia Green Veg, a Gaia Green Bloom, adding blood meal and stuff like that, you can't just put that on the top of your soil and just let it go. You got to put it on your soil, get your hands in there, use your fingers. You really have to scratch that right into the soil before you water it, because if not, it just floats on the top of the water. So I always like to have a nice good size hole on the front near the bottom. That way when I'm fertilizing and stuff, I can get my hand in there and like really move my hand side to side. And then I'll generally put 2 holes on the side about halfway up, and then 1 on the back, depending on, the plant and that sort of thing. So what we're going to do here, I've got the cage in front of me, right here, right? Got the cage right here. So what I'm going to do is, I've put that seam that I showed you away from me, okay? And we're going to start cutting a hole in here. I'll show you. Okay, so across the back there, on the far side of this cage, is the seam. So, and I'm doing that because I'm not going to go back there with my hands as much, especially because I haven't cut those sharp nubs off. Okay, so the front of the cage is right in front of me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go up 2 full squares, and then I'm going to cut the hole right here. And it's going to be 3 across and 2 down. Okay, so I'm going to use the pliers. Okay, so all you do is you just come up, get it as high as you can, just cut them off. Okay. Now listen, I am not a safety Sally by any means, okay? But these pieces I have just cut now are stupid sharp, okay? So be very careful now that you've cut this, all right? So we're gonna make a couple of more holes around here, but I'm gonna show you how we're gonna finish this up. Okay, so you guys can see that. So now what you're gonna need a bastard file, okay? So what you're gonna do is you're going to take your bastard file and you are going to, you're gonna take your bastard file and you're going to file all these smooth. See, it doesn't take much. Look at that. I already run my thumb all over it. I'm not getting cut. Okay. Hit it from a couple of different angles, and all essentially you're doing is just trying to round it off. Right? You don't need to make it go away, but you need to round it off. Okay, so just go all the way around. And the closer you can get these when you cut them off, the less work you got to do. Now you can also use a grinder with a cutoff disc and get it pretty close to that, and then you could just shave it down, but you're still probably going to want to get your file out. See? Smooth them right down. Don't worry about bending the cage. Doesn't matter if you bend the cage because it's flexible. So we're just gonna take the file, round it off like that. Not worried about cutting my hands anymore. And then this long one, we're just gonna take our side cutters. See what I mean? This is why you want a beefier pair of side cutters. And then we're just gonna file this down. Make all the sharp bits go away, because I like my skin attached on my body and I don't like to bleed. Although that happens if you guys watch my projects often enough. You've seen me bleed on many occasions in my videos. So we have 2 more to do. So what you could do is you could have a glove on one hand and not on the other, but you need to be able to feel these with your fingers, right? Because that's how you're going to know whether you got them filed down or not. I had a bigger, before I had a larger pair of side cutters that allowed me to get these a lot closer. That's why I've got longer pieces sticking out here. It's not optimal, but it's what I got to work with. But the metal in these cages is not very hard, and it really doesn't take long to shave these big nubs down, right? So, then you just round and round. There we go, see? So then you're just going to repeat that on both sides and on the back if you want to. You know, it depends on like I said, how your plant is growing. If you're going to put one on the back though, I don't recommend you put one on the seam. Sorry, camera's still pointing down there. I've got a lot of glare on the camera. I apologize for that. I couldn't see my hand. So if you're going to put one on the back, don't put a hole on that seam that you've made where you've tied it together, okay? Because then it's going to be harder. Now, I suppose you could, but you will have to reinforce above and below that seam with more ties. So we're going to do 2 more holes, okay? So now we're looking at the side. We're going to do 2 more holes closer to the top. So like we did before, we don't want to impact on the structural integrity of the circle. So we're going to come down 2 and we're going to make it right here. So I'll give you guys a high-speed version this time. So there we go. It's done. We've got our hole in the bottom. We've got our hole on this side. We've got our hole on that side. And I mean, filming slows things down, but you can easily make one of these in about 10 minutes. Like it's not complicated. The thing that takes the longest is just filing down the metal after you've cut it, so you don't, you know, shred your forearms up into ribbons. So that's one, and I have a total of 9 I need. So I'm gonna get to work. But listen, I'm going to one of my gardens today where I have my plants. So I'll show you how to install one of these on your plants, and then the process that we're going to take by tying the plant through it. Because what we're going to do is we're going to pull it right over top of the plant, and then we're going to start pulling the branches of the plant through these holes, not these holes, but in the fencing, and then we are going to use plant tape to tie that down. We're going to pull those branches through and then bend them down, and we're going to tie them from below so it forces them to stay open. Okay, so that's on the works today. But it's 40 degrees Celsius outside right now, and I am sweating buckets. So I'm going to go find a nice place in the shade that I can continue doing these. All right, have an awesome day. Like, share the video, you know, subscribe if you haven't already, because season's just getting started. So, you know, you're going to want to follow and see what we got going on. All right, have a good one. See what I mean? See all those cuts all across the top of my finger? Those are just from testing the edge after I filed them down. So, just be careful out there.